Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the sixth wonder of the ancient world. Now, unlike the previous wonders we've looked at, the ones carved from eternal stone or completely draped in imperishable gold, this one was made of bronze. And because of that one crucial detail, it had a surprisingly short, intense, and quite frankly, tragic life. It was, simply put, like a meteor that streaks across the sky and disappears. Today we're going to trace the entire fascinating life cycle of the Colossus of Rhodes. We'll go from its miraculous, violent birth all the way to its ultimate and complete erasure from the earth. It is just a spectacular story. We're talking incredible human defiance, unbelievable engineering, and absolutely crushing natural disaster.
Okay, let's dive into this. To really understand the Colossus, you first have to understand the absolutely terrifying siege of 305 BC. The stakes here were a literal David versus Goliath scenario. On one side, you have Demetrius, a Macedonian general who is actually known as the conqueror of cities, bearing down on the wealthy island state of Rhodes. He brought 40,000 men, a massive fleet, and catapults that could launch 80-kilogram stones. Against all of that, the entirely outmatched Rhodians fighting for their very existence.
And Demetrius brought a terrifying weapon to guarantee his victory. 40. That is how many meters tall his ultimate siege machine was. They called it the Helopolis, or the Taker of Cities. Basically, this was a 9-story tall siege tower, covered entirely in bronze plating, rolling on giant wheels right toward the city walls. Just imagine the sheer terror of standing there, seeing a 40-meter bronze monster slowly approaching your home, threatening to literally tear everything you love to the ground.
But then, an absolute miracle happens. Against all the odds, the Rhodians actually held out. Step 1. Survive a 1-year siege. They fought like lions for an entire year until Demetrius just gave up. He abandoned his massive war machines on the beach and sailed away. And this is where we see the genius of the Rhodians. Step 2. They scavenge those abandoned war machines. And Step 3. They melt those very weapons of destruction down to forge a god of creation, their patron sun god, Helios. It was just an ironic, brilliant plan.
But as you can imagine, turning a mountain of discarded bronze and iron into a god isn't exactly an overnight job. 12 years. It took 12 grueling years of labor to pull this off. That's 12 years of sweat, molten metal, and massive iron scaffolding growing like a giant metallic tree under the direction of the master sculptor, Cherries of Lindos. He took on the monumental challenge of creating the largest statue the Greek world had ever seen, pouring his absolute soul into bringing this bronze giant to life.
To truly grasp the sheer scale of this thing, imagine standing next to it. The Colossus stood 33 meters tall, which is roughly the height of an 11-story building. To put that into perspective, the Statue of Liberty is 46 meters from base to torch. But here is the absolutely crucial distinction. While Lady Liberty is hollow copper, the Colossus was solid, heavy bronze. It was a massive, naked, standing male figure wearing a crown of sun rays. Just the fingers of Helios were larger than most regular, life-size statues of the time.
Now, this brings up a fascinating question. Have you ever pictured ancient ships sailing directly between the giant straddling legs? It's a really powerful, highly romanticized image, right? I mean, we've all seen it in fantasy movies, adventure books, those classic 16th century engravings where ships just elegantly glide right under the giant's legs into the harbor. It's an image that has completely captivated human imagination for generations, pretty much cementing the Colossus in pop culture as this ultimate mythical guardian.
Well, now, what's really interesting about this is it's totally false, completely made up. The grand illusion that we have all held on to for centuries is actually one of history's biggest misunderstandings. It is wild how a completely fictional detail can just become the defining characteristic of a historical wonder in our collective memory.
So let's break down why this famous stance is a complete engineering myth. First off, for a 33-meter statue to straddle a harbor wide enough for a ship, the legs would need an impossible width of about 10 meters just to balance. It would look completely absurd and disproportionate. Second, ancient trireme ships weren't tiny little rowboats. They had massive oars that required a huge opening to pass through. And finally, no ancient texts actually describe it this way. None of them. The reality is that the giant stood on a classical pedestal right near the water, with its legs together or maybe just slightly apart. The whole straddling myth? Just an invention by people centuries later who wanted the wonder to seem, well, even more wonderful.
Let's look at the actual timeline of its existence. It was built around 280 BC, and for one generation, sailors got to see the sun reflecting off its magnificent bronze crown. But its glory was incredibly short-lived.
By 226 BC, it had already fallen, and then, much later, in 654 AD, it was sold as scrap metal. Think about that. It only stood for a little over 50 years. For a wonder of the world, a lifespan of just over 5 decades is tragically brief, especially when you compare it to other ancient marvels that have literally stood for millennia.
So what happened in 226 BC? A massive earthquake violently shook the island. The Colossus, which was simply too tall and way too top-heavy, couldn't withstand the tremors. It snapped right at the knees. Ancient chroniclers actually described a terrifying groan of bronze echoing across the harbor as the giant came crashing down, scattering its massive metallic body parts all across the shoreline. It must have been a completely apocalyptic sight for the people of Rhodes to watch their mighty protector fall to the earth in a huge tangle of bronze plates and twisted iron.
So you're probably wondering, why didn't they just rebuild it? Well, the Rhodians actually consulted an oracle, and the oracle gave them a very strict no. The reason was hubris, the dangerous human arrogance of attempting to equal the gods. The Rhodians genuinely believed the earthquake was a divine warning, that their massive creation had offended Helios himself. They figured they had simply gone too far, and so they left it right where it fell. The bronze god entered a centuries-long purgatory of ruins, grounded by the very god it was built to honor.
And yet, it was so incredibly spectacular that it remained a wonder of the world, even while shattered on the ground. As the Roman author Pliny the Elder wrote, "Even fallen, it is still a marvel." For over 800 years, Roman tourists would flock to Rhodes just to see the corpse of the Colossus. They would marvel at the enormous broken fingers and literally peer inside the shattered cavities of the bronze legs just to see the intricate iron support beams that once held the god upright.
But the story takes a dark, final turn in 654 AD when an Arab general conquered the island. He stripped the ruins and sold the remains to a merchant, and the unimaginable scale of those ruins is perfectly captured by a single number, 900. It took a massive caravan of 900 camels, stretching for kilometers along the coast, just to carry away the broken bronze corpse of the sun god. Just close your eyes and imagine that sight for a second. A seemingly endless line of camels hauling away the scattered pieces of a once mighty wonder.
And that brings us to the ultimate afterlife of a god. All that magnificent bronze, the metal that once stood so proudly over the Aegean Sea, was melted down into mundane, everyday items. It became coins, new weapons, simple cooking pans, and eventually church bells. The erasure of the Colossus was complete. Today, not a single confirmed fragment of it remains anywhere on Earth. The very materials meant to immortalize the sun god simply evaporated back into the daily grind of human civilization.
Which brings us to this incredibly poignant thought. Even bronze breaks, even the sun sets, only the stories remain. The Colossus was exactly like that meteor we mentioned at the start, a blazing, magnificent flash of human ingenuity that existed for just a blink of historical time. Its true beauty perhaps lay in its fragility. It didn't survive eternity like the pyramids for sure, but it achieved immortality purely through the awe-inspiring stories that outlived it, passing from generation to generation. So, I want to leave you with this provocative question to think about. What modern marvels of our world today will be outlived by the stories we tell about them? When our concrete and steel inevitably crumble, what will be the Colossus of our era that lives on only in the imagination of future generations? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep wondering and keep exploring.